What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We still have Tropical Storm Gordon hovering out here in the Atlantic Ocean with winds of 45 miles per hour now. And we have this area of interest off the coast of the Carolinas that we are paying attention to, and we are still watching that area of potential threat in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico over here from the Central American Gyre. So let's go ahead and dive right into all of this right now so we can go ahead and get started. Here's the situation that we have with Tropical Storm Gordon. Currently, maximum sustained winds are at 45 miles per hour. Minimum central pressure is 1,004 millibars. Its current location is 20.1 degrees north, 41.7 degrees west, and its movement is west at 9 miles per hour. It's expected to weaken back down to a tropical depression very briefly, well, not very briefly, very shortly, and then strengthen back up to tropical storm strength. But I've been taking a look at the satellite imagery. It has been holding its own. It's been doing a decent job intensifying, doing a decent job consolidating. It is still sheared as hell right now, but ultimately it is fighting back, and we'll have to see how this whole thing plays out. But here's what we have right here. Tropical storm force winds now extend outward 140 miles from the center. It's moving at 280 degrees moving west at this current point. Gordon is forecast to continue to weaken and become a depression on Sunday. I want to take a look at the quick archive very quickly. It was at 45 miles per hour before. Yeah, it looks like it peaked at 45 miles per hour, and it's holding at that strength at this current point in time. But regardless of that, I do think it's kind of interesting. It's expected to become a depression on Sunday. Gradual re-strengthening is possible by the middle part of next week, and that's mainly because of the fact that it's going to be entering more favorable conditions. I don't know if it's going to get down to tropical depression strength, to be honest. I'm looking at the satellite presentation right here. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this real quickly. Satellite presentation definitely is giving you that it factor, and it's definitely bursting up a lot more convection now than it has been in previously, which I think is kind of interesting. It is sheared as hell right now, so if it does ultimately end up weakening, it's going to mainly be due to shear as well as the dry air, because the dry air where it's at right now, it's in a large pocket of it, but ultimately I have been pleasantly surprised with how it's been able to fight off and be able to fight back over the last 24 hours. I do find that kind of interesting, though, and you do see convection on the western side of that as well as the eastern side, which is also kind of something to take a look at regardless. Infrared imagery also shows the stuff going on as well. There is a little bit of a dry air intrusion in this part of the system right here, but ultimately your main area of convection is right over here in this part of the storm. So that's something to pay attention to. Once again, the main threat is shipping concerns. I do have this see this strengthening later next week, and some models have this getting up to hurricane strength down the road, meaning this could be a potentially big ace maker, but we'll have to see down, and we'll take a look at those later. But here's the big situation that we have right now. This is off the coast of the Carolinas. A non-tropical area of low pressure is expected to form in the next day or so along a frontal boundary a few hundred miles off the southeastern United States coastline. The system could generally acquire subtropical or tropical characteristics thereafter over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, and a subtropical or tropical depression or storm rather could form over the next couple of days while the system moves generally northwestward towards the coast. Additional information can be found by the National Weather Service Forecast Office. 40% probability of this system developing in the next 48 hours, and a 50% probability of this developing in the next 7 days. Those chances have continued to go up and continue to go up as we continue to count the days, so we're going to have to pay attention to it. An overall satellite presentation with that in terms of that area of interest. This has not been designated in Invest just yet. So we'll have to keep a very close tab on it. Not quite what I was looking for that sector either, but here's the northwestern Atlantic right here. This is where the system is starting to organize and potentially develop at this current point. It's expected to detach very shortly as a fire truck continues to move outside of my apartment. Anyway, we're seeing that convection is starting to fire up, convection is starting to organize. I do want to check the radar and see if there's anything developing off the coast of the Carolinas. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Wilmington radar. Yes, there is, as a matter of fact, there is convection firing and there is precipitation falling across parts of the North Carolina coast right here, which is definitely something you're going to want to pay attention to. Curious, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be hitting South Carolina, at least not yet. It's mainly concentrated in the North Carolina coast over here, which I do think is kind of interesting. So if you're tuning in from these areas on the Carolina coast, don't go swimming today. There's going to be some high rip currents as the system tries to organize and develop, and that's pretty much what I can say with that. Also, shout out to Connor. I know you're tuning in from North Carolina as well. Yeah, you're probably going to get some scattered showers today, so I just figured I'd let you know while we're taking a look at this. But we're also paying attention to an area of interest in the Caribbean Sea as well as the Gulf of Mexico, as some operational runs now are wanting the system to potentially organize and develop in that part of the Atlantic. Here's what we're basically taking a look at this current point. You're starting to see some convection starting to fire off the coast of Nicaragua and Costa Rica over there. What you're going to ultimately see is in the next few days, you're going to start seeing the development of a Central American gyre. Those systems are a very broad area of convection and rotation that will either come off of the coast of the Eastern Pacific or the coast of the Atlantic in the Caribbean Sea, and that's pretty much the general gist of it. And those have a pretty big chance of organizing into a tropical system. A pretty infamous case of that was Hurricane Michael back in 2018, as well as Hurricane Idalia back in 2023. That was a gyre system as well. Category 3 at landfall, Category 4 at peak. Those are two rather famous cases of that happening. So I figured I'd bring that up just to kind of give you some context of what we're looking at, because the main stuff we're paying attention to are what's the wind shear going to look like and what's the dry air going to be like. Here's what we're looking at in terms of dry air. Ultimately, right now, you're going to see a relatively moist environment across much of the Western Caribbean Sea as the system starts to organize and develop in the next 5 to 7 days or so. And you're going to continue seeing that huge area of moisture. You're seeing those moist upper levels, those moist lower levels to help with it. There is a little bit of dry air on the at the bottom part of the atmosphere a little bit, but ultimately, that's stuff you're going to want to watch. But regardless of that, that is the main thing we're paying attention to as our long-term threat. Obviously, the short-term threat we're paying attention to is that area of interest. I'm curious to see if that will get designated as an invest soon. I think it will once it detaches from that frontal boundary. But ultimately, that's what we're looking at in terms over here. Plenty of moist air, insanely warm water over here. I can go ahead and show you that as well. Here's the warm water temperatures, and we can just break this down across the Gordon, across the Carolina threat, and across the Caribbean threat. In terms of Gordon, where the system is at, it's in an area of about 28 degrees Celsius right now. Just kind of staying out there, just kind of having a little bit of a blast, quite literally actually, as it's blasting convection, and using that water to get up to 45 miles per hour as a tropical storm. And then the system is expected to move into 29 degrees Celsius waters before moving out to the north and out to sea. And it's going to be moving into some better conditions, not just with warm water, but also in the case of ultimately better wind shear, more moisture. I can go ahead and break that up down for you real quickly, Atlantic wide. Let's go ahead and use the water vapor right here. Yeah, as you can see where it's going to be entering, it's in a dry air slot, but there is more moisture up further to the north, and there is a little bit of wind shear over here, but ultimately that moisture can help kind of counteract that at least a little bit. I obviously can't counteract the amount of wind shear it's up there. It's about there right now. There's where it's expected to go. It's about, I'd say, 25 to 30 knots of wind shear. So it definitely could counteract that a little bit. But that wind shear is expected to go down a little bit and allow for the system to breathe, grow, and develop. So that's what we're paying attention to. And that's what we're also paying attention to with the water temperatures with Gordon in terms of the Carolinas threat, where it's currently off in the Gulf Stream. You have water temperatures of 29 degrees Celsius. That is 84 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the Carolinas or anywhere generally in the United States. Plenty of warm water for tropical development. And that water does go down generally deep, but we will get to that in just a second. In terms of the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico system from the gyre, right off the bat, it's going to be in an area of at least 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That is very warm water. And where it's going to be moving into, especially in terms of the northwestern Caribbean Sea and the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, potentially, is going to be in an area of at least 31 degrees Celsius. That's 88 degrees Fahrenheit. More than enough warm water to really blow stuff up in terms of convection, really blow tropical systems up into potential hurricanes. That just on itself right there. But also I need to show you the ocean heat content as well. Ocean heat content, very incredible across the Caribbean Sea. I know I talk about this like a broken record, but across the Caribbean, you're seeing 175 potentially areas of over 200 OHC and a lot of the the northwestern Caribbean Sea as the system moves through with the Gulf Stream, that area over there, and then if it moves further to the east towards the Bahamas, it's still in an area of about 150 OHC, which is a very impressive feat in itself. So we're going to have to keep very close tabs on this in terms of where Gordon is. It's in an area, matter of fact, let's go ahead and take a look at where it's at. It's about 40 degrees west right now. So ultimately, it's in an area of about, I'd say, 50 to 75 degree OHC. That's good for conducive strengthening, and that's good for conducive development. And that's part of the reason, well, it's another part of the equation as to why Gordon has been sustaining and has been strengthening, even though it's in a relatively dry environment. Matter of fact, I want to go ahead and quickly pull up the discussion right here just to kind of take a look at a few things. Gordon Center is exposed and located west of its deep convection. This structure is a symptom of vertical wind shear and continues to plague the tropical storm. Gordon is also struggling with the environment at this current point. It is going to continue to move into a dry and stable air mass, but the fact that it's able to get up to a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm is a feat on itself, and it's kind of impressive given all the conditions that's going against it. And the one condition that's going for it, well, it's using it at its full extent, so we'll have to pay very close attention to that. Carolina's threat, 75 to 100 OHC. Don't need to really talk too much about that. I've already breaking it down yesterday, and I already broke down the Caribbean threat as well. And we already took a look at the wind shear as well, at least in terms of Gordon. Carolina's threat, you're starting to see that huge amount of wind shear start to move out of the area. It's expected to weaken down to, I'd say, about 25 to 30 knots or so, and that's going to allow for the system, if it does develop, to breathe a bit more before it ultimately makes landfall in North Carolina and potentially get this thing to become a tropical system if it can actually pull it off. But regardless of that, you're seeing all the 60, 70, 80 knots of wind shear finally moving out of the area and allowing for potentially the system to, after it detaches from the front, to breathe, grow, and develop. So we're going to have to pay attention to that in terms of what we're watching for the Caribbean Sea. Yeah, we can go ahead and pull up the shear forecast for you right here. Let's go ahead and pull up the shear forecast courtesy of the European run, and I also want to pull up the moisture component as well, mainly because I want to see what the dry air is going to ultimately look like, not just for the Caribbean Sea, but also for the Carolinas as well. So here's the shear forecast. Shear is expected to decrease across much of the central Caribbean Sea. It is expected to pick up a little bit in the western Caribbean, but ultimately what you're noticing is you're starting to notice that wind shear finally start to back off by about 4 days out, and then by the time we get up to 5 days out, there's a bit of a trough that's currently going to be over Florida, and that's going to ultimately keep all this wind shear out of the Caribbean Sea and the extreme southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, as well as parts off the coast of Cuba. And this trough definitely is generally weaker than what some were anticipating as well. And you're still seeing that reduction of wind shear quite a bit, although some starts to come back about a week from now, but it's not going to be really enough to hinder any tropical development on its own. As for the Carolinas threat, yeah, you're definitely starting to see that weakening of wind shear right now. You are starting to see that happening. You're starting to see that break in the ridge right there, where that low amount of wind shear definitely could help at least give for a period of about 2 to 3 days, a chance for the system to organize and develop and have relatively good conditions to do that. In terms of the moisture, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Plenty of moisture in the Carolinas, a little bit iffy right now in the Caribbean Sea, like I was mentioning earlier in the video, but ultimately you're starting to see that moist air. You're seeing a lot more moist air kind of start to infuse across the Carolinas and around that system over there. You're not going to see that much of a dry air threat, at least for then. And then in terms of the Caribbean, there is a pocket of dry air that moves into the Caribbean Sea, which I do think is kind of interesting, but it will eventually get mixed out as the system starts to organize and develop. And you're starting to see more moisture really start to ramp up thanks to the Central American gyre and other areas. As the Gulf of Mexico becomes drier, you're starting to see the area around the Bahamas and Cuba become more moist, so we're going to have to pay attention to that as well. Let's go ahead and show you the track models and the intensity for Tropical Storm Gordon as well in terms of the aggregate before we move on to the ensembles, because I wanted to go ahead and show you some more stuff. Here's the track models that we have pulled up for you right here. Expected to continue a general westward to movement for the next 48 to 72 hours. It's going to kind of be a pretty big spread of when the system turns further to the east. Well, not further to the east, but further to the north. And depending on when it does that will really ultimately be determined on how the steering currents will do down the road. Intensity models are also pretty interesting, as more models are now calling for hurricane strength after it moves through into a more unstable environment. You're starting to see Category 1 scenarios popping up. You're starting to see a Category 2 scenario pop up. They've always been there. It's just been rather inconsistent at that current point in time. But regardless of that, you are seeing those areas right here. Let me go ahead and move my camera thing over here just to give you the full scope of that. But regardless, you are seeing more of these models being a bit more aggressive with Gordon than you would like to see. The good news is this is going to be staying out to sea, so that's some solace right there. But shipping concerns are still the main threat. Going ahead and going to the ensemble runs right here. Here's the GFS ensembles. Let's go ahead and go to 336 hours out. Not just because I want to scare you or anything like that, but just to show you the full context as to what we're looking at in terms of this Caribbean system over here, because this is going to be more of a long-term threat. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and go back to about 168 hours out just to show you basically, okay, never mind, 150 hours out will do, just to show you when we'll start seeing those scenarios. Ultimately, in about 5 to 7 days, that's when we're going to start seeing it, but you're still starting to see that uptick with the intensity and with the tracks. The runs are kind of all over the place. Some of them want going to the Gulf, some want it going towards Florida, some want it going towards Cuba and the Bahamas. But ultimately, if we compare that to the 0Z from earlier, you're starting to see an upswing of and that trend continue to go up, as well as from the 12Z from yesterday. Looking at the European run as well, here's the 0Z European. I want to take a look at the 12Z. Yeah, the 12Z European from yesterday didn't have anything. The 0Z ensembles for today on weather nerds right here isn't showing too much right there, but ultimately you are starting to see that upswing of the computer runs, so that's stuff you're going to want to keep a very close eye on. Let's go ahead and lastly show you some operational runs with everything that we're looking at in the Atlantic Ocean. Let's go ahead and do that, as well as move my screen over so you guys can see a bit more. Okay, I didn't want to do that. I love to take a sounding every day, but I want to show the operational runs. But here's what we have with the operational runs. In terms of the European, it wants Gordon to do its own thing, kind of hold together a little bit, but the European does want this system to dissipate and then start to regenerate a little bit, but a little bit as it moves further to the north, gets up to pretty strong tropical storm strength or even hurricane strength as it approaches the western Azores Islands. But that's going to be in the next few days or so. It's going to be a very slow-moving storm for the next few days, so we'll have to pay attention to that. Here's the GFS run. The GFS with the Carolinas wants this system to get down to 998 millibar tropical storm before making landfall near the South Carolina, North Carolina border. So I do find that kind of interesting in terms of Gordon. It wants the system to kind of dissipate and merge with another system, which I do find kind of interesting. But the GFS also does want another tropical storm to form off the gyre and potentially impact the Carolinas. So we're going to have to pay attention to that right there. Is it realistic right now? It's too early out to say, but ultimately, what I will say to you guys is take this very seriously, and we will keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with Storms United, be sure to join our Discord server. Link is in the end screen. That'll be showing up shortly. Also, shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. If you want to personally support me and my channel, be sure to join my Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.